Welcome to Try This at Home. I'm Cliff Bumgardner.
I'm still Harrison Stewart.
And this week we are not talking about an episode of Mythbusters.
What?
We are talking to a Mythbuster.
Buster.
Yes.
It's Buster.
We are interviewing Buster.
It's just 50 minutes of silence.
And now I kind of feel like that should be our April Fool's prank next year. Just an exclusive interview with Buster.
Please.
And now I have to cut this out of the show or else it's going to give away our idea.
Well, people have famously short memories, I
This
hear.
is true. This is true. Yeah. Can't let the giant fan base get a hold of this idea.
They are begging for info. Just knocking down our doors.
As listeners will know, we have just wrapped up our complete rewatch of Season 1 of Mythbusters. Season 2 will begin in January of 2025, but before we get there, we have some special episodes planned that we have been saving and are super excited about. And we are starting with our very first interview.
Oh my.
Our first actual, I consider this person a Mythbuster.
Absolutely.
A bona fide Season 1 standout. She was one of our favorites all throughout Season 1. Unfortunately, we know she's not in much of Season 2, and we're going to get into that in this episode.
Ooh.
But our guest this week, our first ever guest, appeared on 16 episodes of Mythbusters across Seasons 1 and 2 as the resident folklorist. She received her doctorate from the Folklore Mythology program at UCLA and is now a professor at Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles. We are so excited to welcome to Try This at Home our very first guest, Dr. Heather Joseph-Witham. Dr. Heather Joseph-Witham, welcome to Try This at Home. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is so exciting. We have just wrapped up our rewatch of Season 1, and you were a favorite from the beginning. And so we are so pleased that you're our very first guest. You're the first official, we consider you a Mythbuster. Mm-hmm. And you're the first one to join us on the show. So we are so excited to actually get to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, and I can't wait to hear what y'all have to say and what your perspectives are on all these stories.
Absolutely. Before we get into the Mythbusters of it all, though, I'm sure that some folks listening are wondering the same thing that we are, which is how does one become a professional folklorist? So how did that start for you, and what does that path kind of look like?
Oh, it's just a really weird path on the whole. I have a wonderful family. And all of the women in my family are, I would say, somewhat magical. And my grandma Molly, who was from Poland, always, walked around seeing ghosts everywhere. She didn't like them, mind you. She didn't want to be seeing them, but she did. And my grandma Rachel, who was from India, used to do all of these wonderful rituals, incantations, and spells. Somebody stole something, she'd be doing something to find out who stole it, whatever. And I always was engaged with that side of things and fascinated by the paranormal and magic and stories about it. And so, I always sort of pursued that as a sideline, always reading the myths and the, books of magic and different things that I could find. And when I graduated, I think, after I got my bachelor's in political science, I was tour guiding for a while. And I found while I was tour guiding around the country, all I was doing was telling like legends about the places and stories of, ghost stories of people who were killed and popping up. And I was like, I wonder if I could go back to school for that stuff. So I found a wonderful doctorate in folklore and mythology, which was at UCLA. And I had a incredibly glorious and fantastic time there. And that led to, a little bit of TV stuff because people would call over there and go like, hey, what do you know about stories about comets? Oh yeah, I know all about that. I know all about that.
You've come to the right person.
And I'd pop in and do some kind of guest show or whatever.
That is so cool. Something that we've talked about a lot that we have to keep reminding ourselves is in the early days of Mythbusters, especially, and with a lot of these stories, it wasn't there wasn't social media like there is now. There wasn't a lot of that kind of reference point. So it's like we have to remind ourselves sometimes in watching the show of like, this was something that people maybe hadn't heard. Like now you see stories come across your feed all day long. What was that like at the time in terms of people are reaching out to you with stuff? Was it like, here's old wives' tales I've heard? Is it like, here's this weird email chain? Like what was kind of the status of these stories back then?
I will tell you that people have always been somewhat aware of this kind of stuff, because before Mythbusters was on, there were, In Search of, and a couple shows I was on were like Sightings and The Other Side, and Real Ghosts and all those kinds of things. So there was stuff. Arthur C. Clarke's Cosmos. There were shows about it, just in a different way. I think Mythbusters was the first time people were actually testing out the narratives. And so they were doing less of the supernatural stuff and more of that, how can this work or could it work? Which was at the time a pretty novel take on it. Pretty cool. It definitely stands up all these years later. I think those guys did an amazing job.
Yeah. That's actually a question that we've had all the way through our rewatch of the show. When we started watching, especially the pilots, it was so different than what we remember the show being, because we remember the later seasons where it is very science-based. It's really like a pop sci show. And then in the early seasons, there's a lot more mythology and folklore built into it. When you first heard about it, like, do you remember what the pitch was of like, here's what this show is even supposed to be?
Yeah. It started with, so I talked to Peter Rees, who was the creator of the show, and someone had called UCLA again, and at the time I wasn't there anymore. I think I was still teaching a class there. But an old professor of mine said, "Oh, talk to this person," and he gave me a call, and he was like, "Okay, we're gonna talk about these legends, but I'm into science, and he had done some robot show or something, and so we're going to really test these things out, and we're thinking of a name." And he goes, and I'm like, "What is it?" He goes, "Oh, Mythbusters." And I go, "That's a terrible name."
You heard it here first.
That's not what a myth is. Like, to me, a myth as a scholar is a sacred story. So it doesn't mean it's true or not true. They're told it's true. And so they definitely hold like deeper metaphorical truths. But so I was like, "Oh, you can't call it that." And you just didn't listen to me, which was good, because that's your name. Yeah. But that's how that started for me. And they talked to me a little bit about what they were going to do, and the balloon guy and lawn chair and all that stuff. And they actually, Peter and a little film crew came to my house in Redondo and filmed it there, those first that pilot episode. So that was pretty funny. And then I thought that was going to be the end of it, because I do a lot of like, I guess you call them one-offs. Like you go and you talk about this thing and then you go away, and and you had a really fun day, But so I was actually surprised when they're like, "Hey, you want to come up and I think Peter said something like, you want to move up to San Francisco?" I'm like, "No."
Not at all.
No, I'm kind of busy down here, and I had a toddler, and I was trying to become I was an assistant professor at the time, so that was like my life. So I was like, "Oh, okay, we'll just fly you up here to do this." And I'm like, "What are we doing exactly?" And they're like, "Oh, we got picked up." Oh, great, that's great. So I got to go up there, and as you already know, Jamie I don't know if he still has, because I lost touch with him, but he had that incredibly humongous warehouse space in South San Francisco that was like, Wonderland in there. He had, he was meticulously organized and had like drawers of things that were labeled, and then, weird arm over here and a head over there and a machine over here, and it was an amazing space. So I was just gobsmacked by the whole thing. I'm like, "Where are we?" You know?
What vortex did I just enter?
That's exactly it. But I have to say that first time filming, I was probably up there for 2 days or something. And, I got there, they were all very welcoming. And then they all took me out that night, and they wanted to, just hang. They were so excited to be there for their show. And it was just like, it was just a great feeling up there. I was really impressed. And, there's never anything wrong with working with a bunch of smart, interesting people.
Yeah, that was actually a thought we were talking about on the show in the past, of just how important Adam and Jamie and kind of their own mythic status became over the course of the show, of this relationship. Do you remember meeting them for the first time and what that was like?
Yeah, I didn't know who they were and didn't really know anything. And everyone at the beginning was really sort of excited and modest and wanting to make this thing work and really welcoming. And I remember, Jamie in particular, he was like kind of like a Renaissance man. He knew something very intense about almost everything. And I just thought, wow. Yeah, so conversations were great. I would say my primary contact was Peter, though, because I would sit down and Peter would interview me while they were in another part of the warehouse experimenting. But the trajectory of the thing changed over that season. I think I was only there the first season and the beginning of the second. And at the beginning it was like, here's this one crew, they were all really close. They were from Australia, and
a single high-speed camera.
it was, it was pretty mellow, pretty small, and everybody was, focused on one thing at a time, kind of thing. And then I would come up every couple of months. They'd fly me up there. I'd film whatever stories. The very last time I was there, it was like a completely different scene. It was busy, crazy. Were dealing with explosions. They had expanded their cast. They had definitely more than one thing filming at a time. I was like, oh my God, what happened? So I think that explains, I'm sure they had to change to keep themselves relevant. And the cast, expanded. There were more people doing different things, and probably they had a lot more pressure from their network and to, do explosions and do things. And, they changed and they did it well. They managed it for, I don't know how many years.
13 seasons overall, over 300 episodes, which is just mind-boggling to us, because now we're trying to watch all 300, and that's hard enough on its own. So I can't imagine making them.
Yeah.
In those early days, as you were talking about, when it was the small crew, how would that work in terms of your involvement? Were you bringing them stories and saying, here's might be something that I've heard that I would love to talk about? Or were they saying, here's a thing that we've got, and giving it to you and asking for that research?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was brand new with them and I didn't want to overstep. I had so many stories I would have loved to suggest, but I just took their lead and they would email me, here's these like 6 stories we want to talk about. Can you, here are these things we might mention. And then I would do my research and figure out what I wanted to say and then pop up and Peter would interview me. So it was pretty mellow. Honestly, and I didn't get involved with their production process at all. It wasn't my role, I don't think, although that would have been fun.
Yeah. Now, was there one that you can recall that they brought it to you and you're like, oh, you have come to the right person, friend?
No, I felt that way about all of them. Like,
Fair enough.
I loved all the stories, and I was happy to talk about them. And, they used whatever they used, but we would talk for hours, so they had a lot of footage and they could just use what they wanted. And an urban legend or a folk belief, there's always something to say. There's always research to be had, a history to it, parallels to it, and what does it mean societally? Why are people telling the story? There's always, doesn't matter what the story is, there's something to say.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun of it for me is, getting a story and going, ooh, what does that mean? Why are people talking about pennies? Like, that's not even interesting to people. What is that? So that was always great. But there was one story. My favorite story was the one about when they buried people and they'd ring the bell in the Victorian era. That was my favorite because I'm a total Victorian aficionado. I love everything about it. And I'm just fascinated by spiritualism and, bustles and the whole thing. I will talk about that all day long. So that was great because I got to dive in and be in that world for a little while. And
And that one is such a good visual. Like I feel like it's a perfect intersection between a lot of different things. Like you have the ringing bells, you have the buried alive, which is terrifying. Like it's like a perfect creepy, maybe true thing. You know what I mean?
I know. I mean, wasn't there something just in the news last week where someone was at their own funeral and woke up? Like,
yes.
How did that happen? So if it's happening originally now, it's happened. Like, yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly. Thank you. See, finally someone on my side.
We had a very visceral response to that episode because it was hard to even say that we liked it because of that feeling. Yeah. Actually seeing Jamie be put in that situation, there was just that primal thing in your head of like, nope, this is wrong. Yeah. I shouldn't be seeing this happen. Like even though I think at the time we were like, I don't know if we like this episode. In retrospect, to your point, it makes you feel something that was extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he definitely was terrified and had to get out. And that I would never volunteer to do an experiment like that.
No. That's what Buster's there for. Send in the dummy, man.
Send the dummy. I would not do that, nor would I go swimming with sharks. But those are my big two.
Yeah.
You mentioned there were stories that you would have loved to have seen them do. Does one come to mind of something that you thought, oh, this would be such a great area for them to have gone into?
Well, honestly, one of the conversations I remember having with Peter was, I love the paranormal. So I used to say, hey, what could you test this? Could you look into that? And he was adamant that was not the direction that show was going. And so I was like, okay, but that's always what I wanted to do, to see if they could test out, possession.
Yes.
I'd like to see that because I think it's a very real thing. And I would like to know what the body's going through when you're in possession state. Multiculturally, like there's different cultures who respond differently. Like if someone's got the Holy Spirit coming through them, they're doing like this back and forth thing, like this, it's like staccato almost.
Yeah.
Wow.
But, you see those Thai shamans, they've got the same jerkiness. They're going like this, side to side, side to side. If you see, Vodou practitioners, they're doing, it's like a full top of the body, but it's that same jerkiness. So something like physiological for sure is happening. It's just culturally prescribed as which way you're almost like jerking and the way that the language is coming out. So I'd love to see things like that tested. Absolutely.
It's funny you say that because I think one of our reactions throughout the season has been that some of the most interesting stories and some of the most interesting topics like that, in terms of the structure of a TV show where they have to test things and put things on camera, kind of struggled at times. We watched an episode late in the season where it was about are they putting implant or chips in you, microchips in you when you're getting your blood drawn, and can you find it with a stud finder? And the thing about that episode that was interesting to watch was they didn't really have a lot to test. And so the episode becomes, we're going to tell you this story, and then we can't really prove anything because the Red Cross is not going to do that on camera, So was there a tension at times that you felt between that kind of, we want to tell stories and explore a story, but we're also a science testing, like we need to be able to apply scientific method to things, kind of, was there a tension there?
Not for me, because I wasn't in that space. Like usually I would get up there and they'd be in a production meeting or something, figuring out how they were going to go about the day. And then they'd be experimenting. And in the meantime, I'd be talking to, the sound person or whoever about the experiments they did and what happened. And, I'd hear all of the stuff. So often I'd be there after an experiment happened or didn't. So I wouldn't always know what was going on with that. And I am not a scientist. So, I'd be the last person to be asked about how to do any of those things.
It was interesting as a show goes on, especially when it gets out of the pilots, they very much feel like they put like Adam and Jamie are one side of the brain and they put you on the split screen. As the show goes on, of almost this kind of like, these are the guys who are doing like a hardcore test, and then this is the Mythbuster telling the story, and it really works. It really works to help tell the story and to give that other perspective to it that I think kind of got lost as the show went on. Like your involvement was really key to expanding it beyond just, we're going to blow stuff up in a lab, to this whole other form of storytelling. What was that like? Did you experience anything interesting when the show came out? That you had mentioned you'd done some one-offs, but now show becomes a hit pretty early from what we understand.
Yeah, I know. I just remember I didn't realize there was anything really going on. I almost never watch myself on anything because I can't stand it. Like, oh, why was I wearing that? Or why did I say, that sounds so stupid? So I just didn't and don't. So for me, it just started with getting weird emails from people being like, you're so weird. I saw you do blah, blah, blah. And then you said, what? Who's this on my email, So
I open every email with "you're so weird." I find it's the best way to get to someone's heart, honestly.
It is. And, you won't believe it, but I still honestly get people messaging me on Facebook being like, oh, can I talk to you? I'm like, no.
Please don't.
If they say, oh, I liked this episode, then I'm happy to talk to them. But
yeah.
Like it's so, so that was many years ago. But, and in fact, let me tell you, I just got signed on to be part of another TV team, but I won't say which it is because I'm superstitious because we're not filming till next month. But I got that because somebody was watching an old Mythbusters and goes, I wonder if I could find that lady.
That's awesome.
Nailed it.
Well, that's kind of funny. Okay.
We need a top expert.
Yeah. Smart, interesting people to work with. So I'm always like super, super psyched for anything like that.
Yeah.
It's great that it still looms that large in your life all these years on. Like Mythbusters feels like it is still a huge show and a huge fandom, even though it's been off the air for, I think we're coming up on a decade that it's actually been off. How often do you get recognized in public?
Almost never.
Really? That's interesting.
I feel almost. I feel like there's a time you did.
No, sometimes I am, but people think I'm someone else often, and that's fine. I think being like super famous would be very scary.
Yes.
I don't know how you walk around and be Brad Pitt. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And everyone's looking at you. And I never really thought about it that much, but I was at a Comic-Con once and I was staring at the woman from the first Road Warrior because she was so stunningly beautiful that I couldn't take my eyes off her. Staring at her, and she went like this, and she turned and she looked at me staring at her, and she got this look of absolute panic and fear, and I was like, oh my God. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So I just, I always think about it.
I'm not going to approach.
Yeah. So I'm sure for Adam and Jamie, I can't imagine their approach to that because they were actually famous. I never have been, but they were actually. And so I am sure going out in public was something else for those guys.
I want to believe that actress was actually thinking, is that the person from Mythbusters?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, season 1 and like the beginning of season 2. I'm almost positive.
Early Mythbusters. Yeah. That's definitely who that is. I need to go ask her about things. That would be fantastic.
So the ringing bells. True.
How long has it? I know you said you don't watch yourself, and we certainly understand that. If I didn't edit our show, I would have never heard our podcast. But how long has it been since you've actually seen any Mythbusters?
Honest to God, it's been years. Like I don't. It's been a lot of years, and I mean, none of us watch normal TV anymore, right?
Yeah,
because we're all just streaming. So it's whatever you're looking for. I'm watching Chaos and Agatha, and whatever.
Chaos is great.
So it's honestly been years, and I am sure that it's still an awesome show. Watching it again now, but I can't go back and look at anything with me in it.
I definitely can understand that feeling.
You're missing out.
Let's start with season 3.
There you go.
There we go.
Well, that actually goes to another question that I had, which is as mentioned, we've just finished season 1. We have not yet in season 2, but as you mentioned, you're only in a few episodes of season 2. And so while we have you, we have to ask what happened.
I don't know. You're the first people who've ever asked me what happened. I actually don't know. The last time I was up there, I told you it was a very busy set. And usually they would call me a couple weeks after filming and go, okay, so let's set the next date. Can you come up? Whatever. So a couple weeks went by and I didn't get a call. So I was like, oh, I better call them because life is busy, and I need to know ahead of time. So I called over there. I'm like, what's going on? And whoever I talked to said, I don't see you on the schedule. And I'm like, oh, talk to so-and-so. That's who I was always dealing with. And they're like, oh, she doesn't work here anymore. I'm like, oh, okay. So I don't know what happened there. And then literally I never got another phone call. So wow. I have zero idea what happened there. I can't tell you. I can tell you there was nothing. There was no one I didn't get along with. There was nothing wrong. I just think they went in a different direction, and that's cool.
Yeah.
You get to do that, especially in entertainment, which that happens all the time. So I thought it was weird at the time, but I was okay with it.
I think our kind of working theory, even in what we've seen in the show so far, is the show continued, even in season 1, it feels like it leans more and more to the science side, and more and more and more. And that maybe that was just a side that kind of the other fell away. And they said, well, we need, like, as you said, we need more explosions and we need to focus on this kind of aspect on it. But it's just so crazy to us because you were such an integral part of it. Like when I think about Mythbusters, you're there with Adam and Jamie in my mind. So it's so strange that there wasn't even a conversation about where we're going.
Yeah, I have no idea. And I assumed it was also someone thought that someone else probably told me what was going on. I don't think anyone had any malicious intention or ill will. And it was, like I said, it was fine. And anyways, I got pregnant later that year and was on bed rest. So it wouldn't have lasted too much longer in any case. So I was like, okay, that kind of worked karmically in my universe.
After you were no longer involved with the show, obviously it continued on for many seasons. Over those years, did you see it coming into the cultural discussion around the kind of work that you do? Did you see it starting to become a touch point for people in any way of like, oh, these types of stories, this is where I know this from is Mythbusters, or how did you see it playing out when you were no longer on the show?
Yeah, it would play out in weird ways, not really with academics at all. Academics are in their own universe of stuff and knowledge and things like that. But, sometimes I'd go somewhere, I still remember one time I was asked to give a lecture in Utah, and this guy came up to me afterwards and he was there for a folklore program. And he's like, oh, you're the reason why I'm doing this. Watching you on that, I realized I could have a career in this. And I was like, that's cool. And I was thinking, oh God, I'm so happy you're doing this. I think this is the greatest discipline in the world, but oh my God, how many jobs are there, as a folklorist? I don't know. So I felt good and bad.
So you're the new competition, eh? No.
But it was, I'm first of all, a super non-competitive type.
Yeah.
I figure there's a space for everybody to do whatever they're doing. And, academics in all disciplines, I think they have to be really cognizant of, are there jobs in this field? We're responsible for letting you into this program, and you can't get a job and everything. You just cannot. And now with AI, we don't even know what jobs are going to be in 5 years either. So there's a lot of those kinds of considerations.
That is an aspect with AI and with everything as it is now, where I really feel like it's time for another Mythbusters to explore where we are now. Like there's such a, so that actually was something I was curious with you. I know folks would probably love to hear what you've been up to since the show. And I'm also very curious to hear how that environment has changed the work that you do with we've talked about, there are stories on Mythbusters even where we're like, the whole microchip story was like, maybe at the time that was a small thing to do on the show. We just saw that have a massive impact on society for a couple of years. So like, how has that work changed for you over the years and in what you're doing now?
Well, sadly, I think with, from QAnon forward, the conspiracy theories have a deeper hold now. And so which means that people didn't learn from watching Mythbusters ultimately, maybe because it's so old. And I do think people should take a deep look at all of these narratives and ask why they're there, why we believe them, who you're believing them with and what that says about you and society and your smaller folk groups and subcultures and all of that. So we're in an interesting time with urban legends, and just the fact that, the way people talk about them, like let's just say, for example, the Haitian dogs and cats narrative, which is a powerful story. But people were talking about it as it's a lie. Well, it's not a lie. It's an urban legend, and it's one that's been around for decades. It used to be another racist urban legend where the Vietnamese immigrants were kidnapping your cat and having a neighborhood barbecue. And there were, so the narrative should be, why are we saying this? What is this saying about us? And why are people believing it? So just calling something a lie instead of a deeper conspiracy theory or urban legend means you're cutting off a whole space of analysis about what it means and why people are telling it. So I do think there's space to talk about these things and to test these things and all of that.
How does testing play into that, you think, in the sense of, like, we have talked about numerous times on the show that, like, even with some of the very rigorous methods they would do on the show, there's plenty of people this isn't going to convince. Proving something scientifically may not be enough to change a story or change that narrative. How does that play into it in your mind? Of is it enough to test things, or is it more important to understand the why and the fears and the things that are motivating these types of stories?
The latter for me. That's the kind of commentary that engages me, because I want to know why we behave the way we do, why we believe what we do. And you're right. There are many things that can't be tested yet, including the Big Bang Theory. There are many things that we accept, that we kind of know, but we don't exactly know how. And then that may be overturned. And yes, my grandma made me chicken soup, and it did indeed make me feel better, but nobody knew quite why. But then someone said they did know why, and then they didn't. So, these things go back and forth sometimes, and the testing can be important. I like to know, I'd like to know if some DNA on a hair fiber is actually from Bigfoot. I would like to know that. I am engaged with that question.
Yeah.
More importantly for me also, why do we want there to be a Bigfoot? We're in our wild spaces. What's in our unconscious that's not being fulfilled? Why do we need that mystery? Why do we need that? And we do. Most of us have not seen Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I've seen ghosts, but not Bigfoot. So why do we need him to be there? And we do. There's 50 shows about him, so we need him.
So we all need to start working on our Mythbusters sequel, Narrative Understanders. That's our next wave.
Narrative getters.
Narrative getters.
We get it.
Explorers instead of busting.
Yeah.
That actually gets very nicely to, if there has been a question for us that sort of defined our show as we've been doing this, it's, why did Mythbusters work? We have such memories of it as kids, and as, I work in film and TV, and I've talked at length on the show about Mythbusters is why. I watched the show as a kid. I wanted to make Mythbusters, and I wanted to be the camera guy, and that got me into my career. And it has loomed so large in a place where other shows, there have been others, there were imitators even at the time. There were shows that blew stuff up. There were shows that did stuff in slow-mo. We keep coming back to the stories. We keep coming back to, they told you a story that you could invest in. And since you were a big part of that, and since that's what you study, I'm just curious why you think that story of Mythbusters has loomed so large and has lasted the way that it has as such a special show for a lot of people.
Well, I mean, it was exciting, to see a jet engine car go. So as much as they were having fun. Yeah. And so a lot of that goes to the two stars, because they had that crazy chemistry, for better or for worse, but you wanted to watch it. You wanted to watch them. And they weren't like your normal guys you'd see on TV. They both had their own look. They both had their own fantastic personality, and they were both brilliant. And I think their chemistry was a huge part of why that worked. And just people's sense of fun. We all want to have fun. Everybody wants to do all that stuff.
It's true. I just don't want to lose my fingers in the process, So.
Or get buried alive. No, thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Not that stuff.
Right.
Touched on this a little bit before. You mentioned that you're still doing some television and stuff. Can you give folks an update on what you do today? I think if your IMDb is to be believed, you've still done a lot of television and film since those days. And so what are you up to? Where can folks find you now?
So I never started an IMDb page. So whatever's up there is nothing I put there. I don't know what's on there. And I'm 100% sure it's not updated because I don't know how anyone could find all the weird stuff I do. So I will look now and go see what's on there and see if I could get, I'm sure I don't even have access to it. I don't know who started that. What am I doing? So let's see. I should have an article about these crazy gnome statues in Wrocław, Poland, coming out at the end of the year. That's going to be it's like the most interesting story where during communist era over there, you had Solidarity, which was a very serious protest movement, and then you had these guys who were like, "Oh yeah, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do gnome graffiti all over the walls and have a parade of gnomes down." It was called the Orange Alternative, and they'd wear orange gnome hats because red was the color of the Soviets. And so, they did all this wild stuff, got arrested, they were crazy. And then
you guys love traffic cones.
Yeah. But after they obtained their freedom, the city of Wrocław was like, what should we have for our mascot for the city? This city has a dragon. Everyone's got something serious. So they're like, oh yeah, the gnome. So now they've got these 2 foot tall gnomes all over the city. Like you'll be walking around, there's a gnome eating ice cream that you just tripped over. And it's like this most interesting. I just wrote that. And I've got a book also coming out at the beginning of the year. It's called Blood and Spirits, The Life and Times of the Vampire Sebastian. So it's nonfiction, and it's about this very real guy named Father Sebastian, who basically started the vampire culture in America. And he's so interesting. So he's been taking me to all of his things. He does these vampire balls called the Endless Night. Wow. And I've been just having the best time ever hanging around with vampires and writing about it. So that'll come out at the beginning of the year, and I'm super psyched for that. And I got to, wear black velvet all over the place. So there was nothing wrong with that. Not at all.
Perfect. How did you settle on that as a topic?
I do. So I teach at Otis College of Art and Design, and it's in Los Angeles. And one of the classes I teach is called Vampire Literature and Lore. So I'm really into the topic. I love, of course, starting with the books and the films and everything. And at some point I realized there was a massive subculture and I didn't know anything about it. So I had to, in my practice, I generally do field work. I go out and I talk to people and go to the places where the things are happening. So, I was fortunate enough to run into Father Sebastian and, at one of his events, and he comes and guest lectures for me in class. So we started working on this book together, and it's been loads of fun.
That's amazing.
So that's going to come out.
Yeah, that sounds like when you meet a vampire named Father Sebastian, you go, yeah, I got to write a book about that.
I think, I don't know how there's not already a book about him.
Yeah.
So I got lucky, and he's a lot of fun, and all the people he hangs around with are uber glamorous and wearing the best clothes and have great stories. So not a bit of it has been a hardship, I assure you.
That is fantastic. As we're wrapping up, I wanted to ask you my favorite question anytime I meet someone who has a career that I find fascinating and know very little about, which is, what's your favorite thing you know about what you do?
Perfect.
What's my favorite thing I know about what I do? Gosh, that's a crazy question because there's 7,000 ways to go with that. I know that I'm a very fortunate person to be able to look into the things that I do. I know that I'm very fortunate to have students who are engaged creators who I get to, intellectually and creatively collaborate with, talking about stories. And sometimes, they'll email me later, this movie's coming out. You might, want to watch it because I did this and this. And it's fantastic to get to see how they develop and what they're going to be and become. And that's teaching is really, a wonderful thing to do. I am so fortunate to be able to be in the classroom all the time. And I get to teach at my school the things that I'm really interested in. So I teach a fairy tale class and a UFOs and aliens class, and the things that blow my mind, but also that students want to talk about.
Yeah.
So teaching is it is a collaboration, because as much as you are, bringing in a certain perspective, the students hit you back with something else until, it all becomes something you didn't imagine in conversation. So, I feel very fortunate to have been able to explore stories and beliefs and people and why we are who we are. Like that is the essential question.
That's fantastic. So my last question now, and we touched on this a little bit, but I think it's a good place to wrap up with that, is 20 years on from Mythbusters, how does that still, when you look back at the show and your involvement in it, how do you feel all these years later?
Again, lucky. Like, I got to do a cool thing. It was fun the whole time. I met great people. Got to explore San Francisco a little bit more. Just got to be, part of a neat environment that was stimulating, for sure. And every experience, as any set you're on or any experience you have, any classroom you walk into, every job you go to adds something to your life that you build upon and takes you somewhere else. You're never quite sure, and if you hadn't done that, would you have done this? You just don't know. So it's part of my story now as well. Like it's part of the larger me and my identity. So I'm glad for it. And I just got to meet you guys too, so that was good.
Well, I was going to say, we are the fortunate ones, we feel like, for
Yes.
getting to spend this time with you and have you on the show. We're headed into season 2 next, and it looks like we got 3 great episodes with you left, and then we will yell at the show for the rest of season 2 that you're not there, because we're going to be sad when that day comes. But thank you.
Don't be sad. It's going new directions.
Well, I mean, what a jerk, right?
I can't believe how unbelievably mean. No, I if anything, I can't believe that I mean, she's awesome.
And has somehow gotten even more fascinating since not being on Mythbusters.
Yes.
Like, for most people, if I had been on Mythbusters, that would by far be the most interesting thing in my life, right? Like, that would be the number one in the eulogy.
But no.
Her
I'm
life
writing a book about vampires,
Yes.
and it's real.
Yes.
I mean,
The flex of, I'm writing a book about vampires, nonfiction, amazing. Amazing.
she also delivered it perfectly, you know, where she like held the nonfiction. I was like, I'm listening.
What a fantastic and interesting person. And I really felt like talking to her, all throughout season 1, we had this kind of reaction to the stories aspect of the show.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say, I don't want to speak for you, but I think we both have responded much more positively to the testing and the science. And like, that's the part that drew us to Mythbusters originally.
Yeah.
Talking to her, I realized she really was the voice for this whole other really important thing that was going on in the show that it's almost unfortunate the show ends up leaning away from, I think, because hearing her talk about, it's not just the story, it's why this story is important, is just as important as to whether or not it's true, maybe more important.
I want the Joseph-Witham cut.
Right?
I like the Mythbusters, according to her, would be awesome. I think she brought up testing like possession and stuff like that. I was like, oh my gosh, I would love that.
A very different show,
Yeah.
but a fascinating one. Like very interesting to see and to hear from her how even in the early days of making the show, there was that push and pull between the more urban legend, you know, maybe fantastical is a word for it, aspects of the show, and then that hard science. Like, I think that tension that we felt all throughout the season was real. Like, we were really feeling something that was there, and heartbreaking that she was never told she was leaving the show. I couldn't believe that.
Well, and also that she had never been asked that before.
I know.
And we're like, no, we're genuine fans. We want more of you. I will be picking up your book day of.
And I will say it's not in any way a shot to the show.
No.
I work in TV. I know how these things happen. Like she said, somebody probably thought that somebody else told her, but it's to me, that has always been a thing in my mind of like, there's a story here. And here I just go like, no, my phone stopped ringing and that's what happens. That's LA for you. That's Hollywood, you know, makes perfect sense.
It just moved in a different direction.
What a fantastic guest. We are so grateful for having her.
Thank you.
Yes. As a reminder, from here until season 2, episodes are going to be coming out every 2 weeks. We're taking a little bit of a break for the holidays, but we still have more special stuff lined up for you very, very soon. So keep an ear out, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye, bubbies. Try This at Home is produced by Slugline Media. The show is written, hosted, edited, and shot onto the internet by Cliff Bumgardner and Harrison Stewart. Our music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can follow the show on Instagram at TryThisPod or email us trythisathomepod@gmail.com.